It's coming up on 28 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock here on 97.1 Wadsworth Community Radio. And I was 12 years old when Apollo 11 made that historic journey to the moon. And again, the closest I got to the space program back there was Walter Cronkite on the 6 o'clock news. So this is a very big honor for me here to sit here this morning as I welcome in on the phone with us. We have U.S. Navy veteran Frogman Mike Mallory on the phone with us. Mike was on the recovery team for Apollo 10, but also on that historic Apollo 11 mission that resulted in the first human setting foot on another world. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How you doing?
Very good, very good. And, you and I met a week or so ago out in Wapakoneta.
Yep, downtown.
Yeah, at that celebration down there. And so, Mike, before we get into all the details here about the Apollo 11, give us a little bit of your military background.
Well, I went through what they call frog training, UDT training, and that's where the SEALs come from nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really rugged training, and it weeded out all the guys who couldn't swim hard and fast, and ocean swimmers is basically what we were when we got out. That was just off to Vietnam, and then eventually I got to go on to recovery because my buddy and I were the strongest and the fastest swimmers the Navy had, so that's why they grabbed us for the moon recovery.
Oh, okay. So in other words, that assignment you were chosen. That's not something that you applied for or necessarily put your name in for to do.
No, the officer that was in charge of our group knew that we were the strongest swimmers, and he volunteered us, and away we went. It was a lot better than Vietnam. It was like a holiday, except for the sharks. It was wonderful to get out of Vietnam and go do that.
Yeah, that's one thing, I guess, in that situation that you can't control, the waves and the sharks. So, hey, what type of training did you go through?
Yeah, NASA came up and grabbed our team, and the NASA swimmers showed us how to do it, and then we went out and did the same job, but in the ocean, and we were so fast at it because we were trained ocean swimmers that we've inherited the job ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So it worked out good for everybody.
So a lot of your training may have been in some of the whether it's a lake or a pool or whatever. But was there like a mock-up of the capsules that you trained for actually out in the ocean?
Yeah, they had a steel mock-up called a boilerplate, and they would throw it in the ocean. And one night we had 14-foot seas out there, and we trained all night long in that so that the helicopter crews and the ship crews would be ready for heavy weather in case the capsule came down in heavy weather. And once a frog's in the water, it doesn't matter how big the waves are, you just bob up and down. But the helo pilots, they don't want to get very close at night. So we had some high jumps to make into the creek.
So in other words, you're looking for, and again, a lot of us that weren't out in the ocean or whatever, there's a lot of circumstances that, like a rogue wave or something, you get that perfect amplitude that hits together, and that could not. I mean, that it's funny that can affect the chopper as well.
Yeah, the waves would double in size, basically. Just every once in a while, random, it happens. You got two storms thousands of miles apart, and where the waves meet, you get a random rogue wave, and it'll slap the side of a ship and make dents in the hull. They're that violent. And while we were out there, a few of them hit the capsule, and the rafts on one side and the capsules with its flotation collar on that we'd installed for stability, it just got lifted up and stretched apart, and we thought the astronauts were going to go in the creek a couple of times. But all worked out.
Now, of course, you did Apollo 10 as well. Now, Apollo 10 orbited the moon, but came back and didn't land. Now, with Apollo 11, of course, there were some other special circumstances. Number one, there's moon rocks, and not knowing, first time we were literally in another world. A lot of precautions were taken for, possible biohazards. Right? Tell us a little bit about. Okay, once the capsule landed, what was all the procedure that you guys went to once there was splashdown of Apollo 11?
When it landed, it becomes unstable and it's upside down. They fill up flotation devices and she gets vertical, basically. And our job is to get that flotation collar around the capsule so it's more stable and a sea anchor on it so it's not just sailing along in the waves. And then we bring a raft alongside that's thrown out of a helicopter, and it's got chemicals in there to wash it all down once the astronauts get out and into the raft. We throw biosuits into them. They hop back out into the raft. We wash all the germs down, and that's supposed to protect the Earth, So
right. And then there
exciting.
there were a couple of different. In other words, I believe when we were chatting last week, you put the flotation device on, and then your raft went. You kind of tethered further away, right? And there was just one other frogman that was there helping the astronauts in and out with their bio suits, right?
Yeah, he was washing them down and getting them ready for the helicopter to come along and pick them up.
And now you got to you were the photographer on that mission, right?
Yeah, and on 10 also, and we got to have the pictures of the astronauts stepping out of the door of the capsule, and it went worldwide. And the other photographers who are out there, one of them was in a helicopter, and they're quite a ways away, and the rest of them are on a ship with these huge lenses, but I was right in the water, so I got awesome shots.
Yeah, that's. Just talk about. With your training and everything that. I know that's your job. You do what you do, but that had to be a very special moment and part of history for that whole Frogman team to be there for Apollo 11.
Yeah, especially a 10 because we got to see the astronauts face to face and talk with them and stuff. On 11, they had biosuits on. You couldn't even hardly get a point across to them because they're talking through filters and stuff. On Apollo 10, those guys, when we opened the door, looked like squirrels in a knothole. They were jumping around and just having a ball. They had been through, 4 minutes of barbecue, flames all around that capsule. And for all the people who don't believe all this was not taking part on a soundstage, you should see those guys when you open the hatch and watch that thing come smoking in through the atmosphere at 17,000 miles an hour.
Yeah,
they were supposed to jump out of the capsule and get in the raft and lock arms so they wouldn't fall overboard. They were running around, punching us, throwing water on us. They were excited. They'd been to the moon and back,
Well, and again, knowing again with on the later missions when the biohazards weren't, it was obvious those weren't there. But again, all special handling throughout the entire process was again to keep those hazards away. So other than the hatch being closed so the water doesn't get back in the capsule and it sink, that was all sealed up, and all the rocks and everything were, the lunar samples were all kept sealed in the capsule until everything was safely back on board the Hornet, correct?
Yeah, that was our job, was to make sure that capsule didn't sink because we'd spent years actually trying to get these rocks.
Right.
So that was very important. Once the astronauts were gone, we had to wait about an hour and a half out there guarding the rocks before the ship could pull up and hoist them aboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So don't let the rocks sink, right?
Oh man, no, that was the big deal.
Yeah.
Everybody was worried about the rocks.
I had to laugh. And again, all the seriousness or whatever of those missions. But I think we were chatting too about you stuck a flower on the window of Apollo 11 that kind of drove the bureaucrats kind of nuts back there, didn't it?
I had a big hippie flower, and while we were waiting on the ship to recover 10, I stuck it right on the front windshield of the Apollo 10 craft. But we found out later they take the windows and they seal them, and then they take them to Houston and they make all these experiments to see what happened to them in space. Well, one of them is all snotted up with a hippie flower, and we got reamed for that. We couldn't put the flowers on the capsule on 11 because that was the big first man on the moon shot.
Right.
So
yeah.
If you look in all the pictures, you'll see one of the frogs, John Wolfram. He's got flowers all over him. Mm-hmm. On his legs and his chest, everywhere, and he was a hit. So after the Apollo 11, that was your last recovery mission, correct? Correct. Yeah. Then I got out of the service. And I know now what you're doing is you sold your real estate for wheel estate, I guess, and you're just traveling the country, right? Yeah, we're over in Indiana right now, and we moseyed up here from Texas to go to the Apollo show. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we're just wandering around, my bride and I. She calls herself the Frog Bride. Yeah.
Yeah, we when you were we met of course met at the astronaut dinner that evening, and yeah, I have quite a few stories here from Gail, and we won't share them just yet. But one of them I do want to ask you about is, where'd you get the nickname Meatloaf Mike?
That's what they gave me here, because I'm not used to talking with people. I'm just in our prayer group. I make the meatloafs, and they called me Meatloaf Mikey. But out there, they called us Shark Bait. That was our nickname out there. So
yeah, and you know, you talk about those kind of things like that, and you know, that's one thing that, I mean, regardless of the training or whatever, I mean, that's you really can't control situations like that in the ocean.
It was rough enough out there where it was always exciting. You never had a dull moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, very good. Now, Mike? What's it like even traveling around the country and seeing the, you know, of course, Wapakoneta. I mean, that was a big celebration, and I understand. I understand it's the 50th, and there was a lot of pageantry around that. But as you travel around the country, talk a little bit about you know, what you see, the excitement in the space program, and especially with us, you know, going back in with that goal of 2024.
Yeah, everybody I've met so far, all the kids especially, that's what I was impressed with. They came up, they get pictures signed and stuff, and they're all going to be engineers in space or have something to do with space. And I couldn't believe how many are pumped about it. So it's going to be good in a few years. It's really going to be good. And I told them, if you have an idea, use it, because all the kids 50 years ago had ideas, and they got us to the moon. So you guys can do it too. Just new ideas.
Right.
They're all pumped.
And you know, that's funny you mention stuff like that. I have and again, grew up with the space program. Again, all my friends were building hot rod cars, and I was building Gemini and Apollo, you know, spacecraft and flying rockets and stuff as a kid. And back and I still have this back in like 62, 63, something like that, for a birthday present. I got a card. It was a Hallmark card, and it was a space station. It rolled out. It opened up in like 4 compartments. And when you look at that, there, you know, you look at some of the things on that card, that cardboard card that was nothing but an idea. There are things on the International Space Station right now that were in that card. So when you talk about kids dreaming and things like that, it's a reality.
Yeah, I got to hang out with 5 other astronauts, and it was awesome, because they've been scientists on the space station, and they got to do hundreds of experiments up there, and they've invented stuff that the rest of the world wouldn't even have now if it wasn't for our lab up there in anti-gravity, the zero gravity. So
right.
It is a great program.
And you know, this is kind of neat here. Well, for me anyway. I'm sitting here. I have a piece of that NASA had, and it was auctioned off and sold or whatever. But I have a piece of the Kapton foil that was the thermal protection on the capsule, and I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm looking at this, knowing that, you know, 50 years ago, you know, you may have touched this piece of foil that I have, and as corny as all that sounds, that's really neat to be at least that part of knowing you guys and saying thank you. So.
When that thing landed in the water, it was all burned on one side really bad, and the foil was peeled off and burned off. And when the salt water got to it, it sort of melted the glue. We had that foil all over the rafts, in the water, everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
so I brought some chunks back, and I put one for the museum down there, a great big chunk inside of a huge frame, and it's up on the wall somewhere in the museum. Has it there somewhere.
Oh, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mike, you know, I really appreciate you calling in this morning. And before I let you go here, I want to say one thing. You know, you're introduced as you go around as the, you know, Mike Mallory on the recovery team for Apollo 11. But I want to back up for a second. I want to stop at the U.S. Navy veteran Frogman. Now, you were picked for that assignment because of your training and your performance and service to the country. And I have to say that it's because of that service and countless other veterans that, you know, we're able to sit here on Wadsworth Community Radio and do what we do every day. And I really appreciate and want to thank you very much for your service.
Yeah, every guy on that ship thought he was just as important as I was out there in the water. We all were part of the moon recovery, and that's cool.
Right,
So,
right. Very, very much part of history. Well, Mike, again, thanks again. It was say hi to Gail for me, if you would, please. And again, thanks for joining us this morning.
okay, thank you very much.
Hey, fair winds and following seas, friend. Take care.
Got it. I like that.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye. It is 97.1 Wadsworth Community Radio.